Hello students. In today's class, we are going to study about the cerebellum. In the previous lectures, we have studied about the brain, the cerebrospinal fluid, the brainstem, which consists of the medulla, pons, and the midbrain. Today, we are going to study about a very important region of the cerebellum. This cerebellum, though it is smaller in structure when you compare it with the cerebrum, it is smaller in size, but it occupies the posterior behind the head. Okay, posterior and the inferior aspect of the cranial cavity. That is inferior means lower portion of the brain, and posterior means behind, behind and lower portion of the brain. So it just like the cerebrum, the cerebellum also has highly folded surface. You can see the take the brain of the any animal, sheep, or goat, and you can identify it is highly folded. It has got a highly folded surface that will increase the surface area of its gray matter. That is, the gray matter is present in the outside. Unlike the spinal cord, where the gray matter is inside, like a butterfly like structure, here the gray matter is called as the cortex, which is present on the outer surface, and it has a great number of neurons. Though the size of the cerebellum is very small, it is only the tenth of a size of a brain. It contains about half of the neurons of the brain. The half of the total neurons of the brain is present in the cerebellum. The cerebellum is posterior to medulla, that is behind the medulla and the pons, and inferior to the posterior portion of the cerebrum. So below the cerebrum and behind the medulla and the pons. There is a groove, deep groove called as the transverse fissure, which runs along the tentorium cerebelli. So you know you have studied about the tentorium cerebelli. This is the structure or the part which separates the cerebellum from the cerebrum. So this fissure is called as the transverse fissure. So in this picture you can see the cerebrum, highly folded structure, just like the cerebrum. See, cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. This is the cerebellum. This is also highly folded like the cerebrum. So this is the sagittal view of the brain. So we have studied about the brainstem containing the medulla oblongata, pons, and the midbrain. So this is the anterior region and this is the posterior region. So you can say that the cerebellum is posterior behind the midbrain and inferior below the cerebrum. So this is the another structure showing the cerebrum, cerebellum, and the brainstem. This is the diencephalon containing the thalamus, hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. So when you take the shape of the cerebellum, it resembles the shape of a butterfly. So like a butterfly, the shape is in the form of a butterfly. There is a pair of cerebellum, two sides, two hemispheres. You can call it as the cerebellar hemisphere. So there is a central constricted area called as the vermis. The central region you can see in the next slide. Just like a butterfly, the central body part of the butterfly. Similarly, there is a constricted area in the cerebellum called as the worm. And just like the wings of the butterfly, there are two lobes separated by the cerebellate that is the fissure. So this is called as the cerebellar hemisphere. Each hemisphere consists of lobes separated by deep and distinct fissures. So not only this cerebellum, that is the cerebellar hemisphere, each cerebellar hemisphere is also having many regions separated by distinct and deep fissures. So you can see the different regions of the cerebellum in the next slide. The anterior lobe and the posterior lobe govern the subconscious aspects of the skeletal muscle movements. So the skeletal muscle movements are coordinated and controlled by the anterior and the posterior lobe of the cerebellum. There is another lobe called as the flocculonodular lobe, whose function is to maintain the equilibrium and balance of the body. So that is the role of the flocculonodular lobe. So you can see the structure here. So this is the structure. So the view is like this from top to bottom. So this is the posterior side and this is the anterior side. You can see this is the cerebellum. So cerebellum from top to bottom. This is the vermis, the central fissure, just like the body of the butterfly. This is the vermis, and it looks like a wings of the butterfly. And apart from this central fissure, there are so many other fissures you can see. This is the posterior view. So many other fissures are there. So this will divide the each cerebellar hemisphere into many lobes: anterior lobe, posterior, middle lobes, middle and posterior lobes. So in this structure, when you view it from here, so it is seen like no, this is the vermis and these are the lobes, posterior lobe, and you can see some white matter. So white matter is seen here. This is called as the cerebellar peduncles. You can see a pair of white matter. Each lobe has superior, middle, and inferior regions. So you can see the middle region is the largest region of the cerebellar peduncles. So you can see many fissures. There is a fissure here. There is a fissure separating the cerebellar hemisphere into many lobes: anterior, middle, and the posterior lobes. Apart from this, it contains an interior gray matter called as the cerebellar peduncle, which is having three different regions: superior, middle, and the inferior regions, which controls many other functions of the body. So here you can see the structure of the cerebellum. See, this is the view. When you view it from mid sagittal plane, you can see this is like a you can see gray matter on the exterior and white matter in the interior. So this is called as the folia. You can see like no leaf-like structures. So many leaf-like structures are present, and the white matter is in the center. Gray matter is in the outer side. So this is the gray matter, and this is the white matter. Inside the white matter, you have many nuclei. So this is the superior colliculus, inferior colliculus. So this is what is important for us. The folia. So the folia leaf-like structure called as the folia, which contains the gray matter, and the interior white matter is called as the arbor vitae. It is called as the arbor vitae, and inside the white matter, again you have many nuclei. So as we have seen in the picture, the superficial layer of the cerebellum, the outer layer of the cerebellum is called as the cerebellar cortex. So what is it made up of? It is made up of gray matter in a series of slender parallel fold called as the folia. You can see it is the slender parallel fold called as the folia. Inner to the gray matter, there is a white matter, tracts of white matter called as the arbor vitae. It is like a tree of life, which resembles the branch of a tree. Even deeper within the white matter, there are some nuclei called as the cerebellar nuclei. So these are regions of gray matter which give rise to axons, which carry impulse from the cerebellum to the other brain centers. So here you can see the structure very clearly. See beautifully the structure is. This is cerebellum. Then you can see the folia, outer gray matter called as the folia, and you can see the arbor vitae, which is white matter. See, you can see many white matters, and you can see uh, the gray matter called as the inside the thing. There is many gray matter called as the cerebellar nuclei. Cerebellar cortex and cerebellar nuclei is present inside the white matter. So in the previous structure, this is the cerebral peduncle. So as we have seen in the previous structure, this is the cerebellar peduncle containing superior, middle, and inferior regions. So we will see the what is the function of the peduncles. There are three paired cerebellar peduncles attached to the cerebellum to the brainstem, which attach the cerebellum to the brainstem. You can see one pair on each side. So accordingly, there are three pairs called as the superior, middle, and the inferior cerebellar peduncles. So these are bundles of white matter. So they are white in color. You would have seen these are bundles of white matter which is consisting of axons that conduct impulses between the cerebellum and the other parts of the brain. So the axons present inside the white matter of the peduncles will conduct impulse between the cerebellum and the other parts of the body. So, what is a superior cerebellar peduncle? It contains axons that extend from the cerebellum to the red nuclei of the midbrain and to several nuclei of the thalamus. So, you would have studied about the red nuclei in the midbrain. So, the axons of the cerebellar peduncle extend from the cerebellum to the red nuclei of the midbrain and to other several nuclei of the thalamus. This same way, the middle cerebellar peduncles, they are the largest peduncle. You would have seen the structure. So their axons also carry commands for voluntary movements, and they extend from the pontine nuclei into the cerebellum. So from the pontine nuclei into the cerebellum. That is the length of the axons. The next one, the third one, is the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So this consists of many axons, as you can see here. First one is the axons of the spinocerebellar tract. So spinocerebellar tract, this carries sensory information into the cerebellum from the proprioceptors in the trunk and limbs. So you can actually know the from the name of the tract, you can understand what is the origin and what is the end, from where it is beginning and from where it is ending. So spinocerebellar means it starts from the spine and ends in the cerebellar region. So they carry sensory information, that is the ascending tract. It is an ascending tract which carry information of the proprioceptors from the trunk and the limbs to the cerebellum. The second one is the axons from the vestibular apparatus. So vestibular apparatus is present in the inner ear and from the vestibular nuclei of the medulla and pons. So this carries sensory information again from the proprioceptors in the head to the cerebellum. So this is also a sensory tract. So they carry signal or information from the proprioceptors in the ear to the cerebellum. Third one is the axons from the inferior olivary nucleus of the medulla. So we have studied about the olivary nucleus in the previous class. So this enter the cerebellum and regulate the activity of the cerebellar neurons. So these axons, they enter the cerebellum and regulate the activity of the cerebellar neurons. Fourth one are the axons that extend from the, there is no name is not given. So these are all axons extending from the cerebellum to the vestibular nuclei of the medulla and pons. So we have studied about the vestibular nuclei which is present in the medulla and the pons. So this axon extends from the cerebellum to the vestibular nuclei of the medulla and pons. The fifth one are the axons which extend from the cerebellum to the reticular formation. So these are the five types of inferior cerebellar peduncles. Now let us see the functions of the cerebellum. What are the primary functions of the cerebellum? So they are very, very important for the movement. So they evaluate how well coordinated the movements are. So the movements are initiated by the motor areas in the cerebrum. So whether the cerebrum is carrying out this function of the movement properly. So that is what is the function of the cerebellum, to monitor the activity of the cerebrum. So when there is something that goes wrong, the cerebellum will detect the discrepancy or what is wrong with the movement. It immediately detects. Suppose we are climbing some steps, we miss out a step and we go on to the next step, or when you're climbing up or climbing down the steps. So it immediately senses the information and sends the information to the cerebrum and corrects it, so that we can prevent us from falling. Otherwise, what will happen? We will fall down. So it then sends feedback signals to the motor areas of the cerebral cortex. How? Via the thalamus. So these feedback signal will help the to correct the errors of the movement and smooth the movement of the body, that is the skeletal muscles or the limbs or the trunk, and coordinate the actions, that is the sequence of actions of the skeletal muscle contraction. So this is the main region of the brain that is important to regulate the posture and balance of the body. So that is the role of the cerebellum, posture and balance of the body. So this is very important, no, for a person, a skilled dancer. So when a person is dancing, there is or some muscular activity, skilled work, any skilled work, skilled muscular activity, maybe stitching, embroidery, catching a baseball, okay, dancing, speaking, oratorical I mean skills. So many skills are attributed to the cerebellar function. So this has non-motor functions also, such as cognition. Cognition is very important. Cognition means acquisition of knowledge and language processing. So all this can be understood very well by supported image studying using MRI and PET scan. So these are the different functions of the cerebellum. So let us summarize. The cerebellum smoothes and coordinates the contractions of skeletal muscles. So it regulates posture and balance, and it has a very important role in the cognition, knowledge acquisition, and language processing. So this is very, very important. So let us study about the diencephalon in the next class. Thank you.